Hey everybody, this is Scott, the host of the Sunday Morning Coffee Podcast. I would like to invite you to support the show through our Patreon page at patreon.com/smcpod. That's patreon.com/smcpod, where for only $4 per month, you can get early access to episodes and members-only content. Once again, that's patreon.com/smcpod, and I thank you for your support. Wayne McFarland, thank you very much for joining me on the Sunday Morning Coffee Podcast today. I've been looking forward to this talk with you.
Scott, I am delighted. I've been looking forward to it as well. Sunday morning. Yes.
Yeah, beautiful time for a cup of coffee and a bunch of good stories. So
that's it.
We know we had to reschedule a couple of times, so I'm glad we finally got this done.
Anticipation is half the fun.
Exactly right. Let's start at the very beginning, shall we? Let's go back to where you were born, where you spent your childhood, and just give the listeners a little bit of background about who you are.
Well, everybody's getting nostalgic for the farm these days, and I spent a lot of my kidhood on basically a subsistence farm of my grandparents in South Dakota. And Scott, it really sucked. I mean, it was, all this stuff about go back to the land, root in the good earth, pluck apples from the tree. That's all foolishness. A lot of really hard work. And we had no indoor plumbing or running water. And if you've never tackled a two-holer on a frosty day, you truly have not lived.
Absolutely. So, I think people, like you said, they're very nostalgic for the, quote, good old days, but, forgetting how even though there were much simpler times back then, they weren't necessarily better or easier.
Well, there's one thing, Scott, about the passage of time, sort of like getting thrown through a window. Years later, it becomes funny. At the time, not so much.
That's right.
And, I find that a lot of these folks who post pictures of various things and wax lyrical about the old days never lived the way that let's all go live in a cabin in the woods. They've never lived there. or they've never grubbed in the earth with a hoe or killed potato bugs by hand. No.
And my father, when he was born in 1929, so he quit school very young to go work in the lumber camps here in northern Ontario. So, I can't imagine as a 13-year-old, comparing it to the 13-year-old childhood that I had. Certainly not something that I would have relished doing.
Well, I spent a summer in the Forest Service fighting forest fires in Idaho, northern Idaho, here in the States. And I wouldn't wish that. I mean, the people who do it my hat's off to them. I mean, it's really difficult stuff. And having, trees explode on fire around you is a real, again, another experience looks better in the rearview mirror than at the time.
It sure does. Now, when did you, let's think back to, obviously, we're going to talk about your book, and you are obviously a storyteller yourself, and, from our first few minutes of conversation, I can tell that you're very good at it. So what is the first story that you can remember from your childhood that made you think, wow, this is something that I should record here. I should get this down onto paper?
Well, most of my stories were after we talked about being on the farm, and then I'd spend other time with my parents in a little town in Minnesota. And one day, to answer your question, I was, I don't know, very, very early 20s, 21 maybe, on New Year's Day, sitting watching our, 4-channel TV with a headache, probably hungover, and there was, the Rose Parade, Pasadena, California. The grass was green. It was 70 degrees. I looked outside. We had a blizzard, 40 below, and I said, I'm out of here. And I collected a couple of my friends and we went to California. Didn't go back for years. So the stories and the craziness I got involved in, I had a couple stories about my granddad, taking a beating from my granddad, and a story about how people used to call him a psychopath. No sense of humor. But most of the craziness I got involved with was after I left that part of the world and went to the West Coast, land of fruit and nuts.
And there's not many better ways to have stories to tell than a few good friends in a car on a road trip. It seems to be how a lot of great stories start out.
Yep, the one I have about it is the day we blew town with a monkey. So,
so we got to hear a bit of that one.
Well, it was when I was in college, last year of college. I had this roommate, and one day I came home and there was a cage in our living room, and there's nothing in it. So I made a mental note to be sure and talk to my roommate about it. And the next day there was a monkey in it, and so my roommate got on a philosophical soapbox and gave me a lecture about saving animals from lab experiments. And it was only later it occurred to me that we were going to a liberal arts college, and unless a professor of philosophy wanted to vivisect a monkey, for entertainment, that probably was not, the rescue part of it was probably not legitimate. And we realized we had to leave town after my roommate used to carry the monkey around in a big winter coat with his head sticking out. And I got to tell you, Scott, you want to pick up a date? Showing up at a bar with a monkey is, it's good. And one night I wasn't with him, but he went to our favorite watering hole with the monkey, and the monkey got spooked, leaped out of his coat, ran up and down the bar, peeing on everything and grabbing bottles and throwing them. So the monkey and my roommate were thrown out of the bar with orders to never come back, and they'd be visited by the sheriff. So we figured, we wanted to go to California. Now is a good time. So we left town and, ended up in Los Angeles.
It sounds like, a weird revision of the chicken and the egg. Which came first, the monkey or the cage?
Well, that's true. And, there's other craziness in the book. Here comes a plug. Tales from the Day, available at Amazon. Oh man, that felt good. Thanks
for an incredibly reasonable price too. So we'll definitely get that plug in a few more times as we go along.
It works for me. Thank you.
So I know, as being a guy and having your group of male friends, a lot of what we do a lot of the time is we sit around and we have a few drinks and we, tell stories from, our younger days, and, the stories never really change, but they're as entertaining the 100th time around as they were the first time around. Is that where you kind of got your gift for storytelling, was just shooting the shit with the guys?
Well, one thing is, a difference, Scott, is my stories are all true. So, I said to myself, the world cannot be deprived of this. And I used to wax lyrical about some of the craziness I got involved with. And one day my niece sat me down and said, "You need to write these up." And I thought, well, yes, I do. I think my audience awaits. And you, I think, as a media person, will find it interesting. The book is a series of 27 standalone stories. So you start one and it goes through to a logical conclusion. And my publisher's first reaction was, "No, you can't do that. You must have a narrative arc. You must start with, getting cancer or something, and then go through the progression of depression and elation and salvation, and all ends up, that's called a narrative arc. You end up well at the end of the book. People will love it." And I thought, yeah, but things don't work that way. Mm-hmm. Generally, they work on the order of draining the swamp and being bitten backside by an alligator. I mean, and so I just wrote these up as vignettes, such as pitching a loan shark for advertising, or losing 10 grand at the Hollywood sign, or the day Johnny Cash hit on my wife, things like that. And most of the things I have found, Scott, I don't know about you, but what I found is that the crap you get involved with, usually you just stumble into it. I mean, and just sit down and say, I didn't start out to do this, but there you are. And the question then becomes, do you roll with it? Or do you run screaming back in and leap into bed and assume the prenatal position?
And you almost have to apologize to your publishers. Sorry, I didn't get cancer, and have a more interesting arc to the story, but this is what it is.
Yeah, and when the book kind of took off, I told my publisher, hey, I'll let you forget about this in, I don't know, 20 or 30 years.
You're supposed to be the expert here.
That's right. But, society changes, and we live in a 250 character world. Scott, it's like what you're doing, which I'm delighted with. I spent some time in radio, and say what you want about technology, but one of the things that's opened up are things like what you're doing, podcasts. People can sit down and get something going from a broadcast standpoint. Didn't used to be possible.
Mm-hmm.
So
I was talking about this very thing on a different episode that has yet to be published, but about how YouTube basically revolutionized the world of communication and media, and it allows people like me who 25 years ago would never have had the opportunity to speak with people like you. Wow. And to get people listening from all over the world that I would never have expected. And it's just sort of revolutionized everything. And I think there's a hunger in the 280 or whatever limit is character world. I think there's a hunger for sort of longer form conversations, interesting stories that, we've sort of lost in the last little while.
Yeah, I think you're right. And also, it allows people who have the fortitude to jump into it, because as you know, Scott, it ain't easy. I mean, I got a lot of admiration for people who do podcasts and stuff, because it's it's one thing to sit down in the quiet of your office with the dog at your feet and drink a scotch and say, I'm going to talk about the day my business was trashed by a worm. And you, you can just kind of create it and modify it. What you do is very much stream of consciousness. And the other thing that I've always thought might be, I don't know, you could address this better than me, but so difficult for what you do in interviewing people. I've heard interviews where somebody really good, like you, a good interviewer, will get somebody and say, well, tell me, Joe, about when you fell off the building. And Joe's answer is, it was bad. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. It was painful.
Yeah. And then you got to try and fill in the blanks with some person who can't seem to put 6 words together in a row. But
well, that's why I enjoy doing what I do. It's very much, I don't script any questions. I don't heavily edit anything. I like it to be as kind of natural a conversation, like we're sitting at a bar and having a conversation, meeting for the first time. And I think when I listen to podcasts that are kind of, you can tell they're kind of scripted and there's, a bunch of suggested questions. To me, that's not what I do. That's not what I enjoy doing. I just like getting to know people and hearing interesting things about them. And this medium definitely allows me that ability.
Well, what you're doing is a lot harder than scripting questions. I've had a few interviews like those, and you generally can always tell. And it takes a lot more skill to just kind of do a flow of things. And, setting up pre-canned questions and stuff, it can be really a lot easier, I suppose, on the interviewer, because you don't have to come up with anything on the fly. You also don't have to have a 10-second delay in case somebody goes crazy. but still,
And I'm a big sports fan, and one of the things that drives me crazy about sports is the interviews before, during, and after the game.
Yeah.
when like, oh, so you won tonight, how do you feel? Oh, well, I feel like shit. Like, I feel like shit. What do you think I'm gonna say, right? And it's
Uh,
just that kind of mundane questioning. Like, there's nothing ever, because the athletes aren't going to give anything away usually, the coaches aren't going to give any secrets away, so you don't learn a damn thing.
yeah.
Whereas, in this kind of setting, I'm sitting down only ever having exchanged a couple of emails with you, and I'm going to learn, a lot about you as as a person, your life. That's way more interesting to me.
Well, also, it's another thing I don't think people realize about what you're doing and the way you're doing it is then you have to edit it. I know the studio, I don't remember the exact, but it's like 1 minute of conversation and 30 minutes of editing. I mean, it's really takes a long time. And I think a lot of folks who you've been doing this and succeeding at it, and a lot of folks who want to jump in really don't realize the amount of work involved. It's a lot of work.
Hmm. And there's trying to find guests and
Yeah.
arranging the interviews, and yeah, there is
Yeah.
more to it. It's definitely a labor of love for me because I'm not making it's actually costs me money to do it at this point. I'm hoping down the road that'll change, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely a labor of love for me. I'm sure much like your book was for you.
Yeah. And you go along enough, you get enough in the audience, and then people will start to, you know, want to appear as a paid slug along the bottom of your screen, which would be great.
Absolutely, that'd be great. I'm a capitalist. I'm not opposed to money.
Well, generally it allows you to, well, what's that term? Oh yeah, eat.
Yeah,
Things like that.
yeah. Roof over your head, all good things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
go ahead.
did you find that your when you started telling your stories, did you find that your talent for writing sort of mimicked your talent for oral storytelling, where or did the writing take a lot more practice than the speaking part?
Well, that's a good question. Writing the same thing as podcasting, I would guess. You get better with practice, but I was invited, maybe for the last time, to give a seminar to some up and coming writers. And one of the points that I made, it's sort of like, again, I draw the comparison with what you're doing, is, you can be taught things and you can practice things. And if you've got that gene in you, you can get a lot better at what you do. But, for example, I can't draw at all.
So,
You could give me lessons till the end of time, and anything beyond a stick figure would be beyond me. I just haven't got the circuit for it. And to get back to your question, a lot of what we do, in the end, if you don't have a circuit for it, if that's not part of your makeup, you can get good at it in a very technical kind of way. And really, so I can't claim credit for that. But to answer your question, fortunately, my background was such in broadcasting and doing some PR work and running a company that a friend of mine and I founded. Had a lot of experience at writing stuff in a way that people could understand. So that helped enormously. So, yeah, with I found with writing that the big challenge is to, I'm not particularly a Hemingway freak, but what was his line, trying to write one perfect sentence?
mm,
To write something that is not drivel, that's not rambling on and on and on, but still can convey to the reader the sense, good or bad, humorous or sad, of what you're doing very succinctly. That takes some practice, even if you kind of have an inherent sense of it. So, to answer your question, by the time I got to the point of sitting down and writing up stories like The Day I Was Saved by Mickey Mouse, oh, another plug, I pretty well had enough background where I could write something and look at it and say, "Oh, that stinks," or that's good, and be able to kind of hone it down a little bit. So Ray Bradbury, a great writer who's gone now, sadly, said, and there's an old Buddhist thing too. It says, hey, you want to be a writer, you got to write. You want to be an artist, you got to draw. You want to be a podcaster, you got to interview people and do it, because there's no other way to get better. A lot of people that I talk to seem to think, I had one guy contact me and say, listen, I got some great stories to tell. I'll tell them to you and you just scribble them down. I said, no.
No, thanks.
Thanks very much, but that's not the way it works.
So you mentioned that your niece was the one that suggested that you start getting your stories down on paper. So how did the book come about? Was it something that you submitted it to publishers? Did you post it on a blog and they found you? How did the book itself come about?
No, I submitted it to a publisher, and for anybody who's listening who might want to do the same, I guess the tip that I think I sent it out to 300 or something. And, there's always this talk out there about rejection notices. You could paper your wall with them. But the thing to remember is that, there's a lot of publishers out there, and most of them, not all, the big boys and girls, of which there's about 4, don't. But most publishers specialize in a certain genre, specialize in romance novels or cookbooks or whatever. And you may have the greatest travel story in the world, but if you submit it to a publisher that specializes in, caring for a horse, they're not going to publish it. It's not their audience. Mm-hmm. So that's really part of the challenge. So to answer your question, yeah, I submitted it to some publishers, and finally one of them said, we like crazy people. This is really pretty crazy. Why don't we see what we can do? So
it's a good thing you found a niche for books about crazy people then.
Yeah, it is. And what I found out there as well, which I bet you have run into, Scott, is that, I went through a stint where I got rid of my first publisher because they weren't really doing the job. And I had a short stint without a publisher, and then I got another one. And there are, my God, hundreds and hundreds of scam artists out there, both for podcasters and for writers. Scott, we'll make you famous. You'll be on Spotify. You'll be on broadcasting all over the world. Just give us $5,000 and your life dream will come true. Well, they're just con people. They're ripping off people based on their hopes and dreams. You must see tons of it.
Oh, yeah.
And I still get notices in about, canned stuff. Dear, and then your name here. We have reviewed your book titled your book here, and then a big pitch on what they can do for you. So
yeah, there's a lot of people out there claiming that they can do certain things for you as long as you give them the right amount of dollars.
That's right. Hey, and yeah, it's just, that was one thing that I was really sad to see. So if there's any tip I can give anybody out there who wants to write up something, it's to not get involved with a self-publishing outfit that says, hey, what a great book for, X thousands of dollars. We'll print, 3,000 copies of it and put you out, there to all the places that list new books. Well, not only can you do that on your own, but if you put your book into, say, Amazon and use their self-publishing tools, mm-hmm. you can buy your book, if you want to give a bunch away, for peanuts, $2, $3, $4 on a per book basis. You don't need to order 1,000 of them or something. It's just it's tough. It's a cruel world out there,
Yeah, it is. And, that's interesting that you mentioned Amazon self-publishing, because years ago, I guess it would have been probably 7 years ago, I actually released 2 books of my own poetry on Amazon.
Oh,
And yeah, and it, it has it, like you said, you can buy copies of it for $3 and four
yeah,
bucks or whatever
yeah,
it may be. It's a legit operation. They send it to you within a week. It's incredible for,
yeah,
for someone that, and I did it because I love to write, and B, I wanted to see a book of mine in print,
yeah.
and even if I never, I sold a handful of copies. Even if I never sold a copy, I've got this book in my hand that I wrote. I designed the cover. I did everything. It's incredibly satisfying.
Well, there was this guy who wrote one book and couldn't sell any of them and spent his life working as a postal clerk till he died. That was Herman Melville, who wrote Moby
Moby
Dick.
Dick. Yep.
And you don't know. Maybe you and I'll get discovered after we die.
Maybe,
You know,
maybe we can hope.
thanks a lot, right?
That's right. You couldn't have been here 30 years earlier.
Yeah. Where were you when I needed to pay my bar bill? I mean, come on.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how did you find the process of working with your publisher in terms of, um, them editing the stories? Did you have complete control over the editorial content? Was it a good working experience? I'm sure it was, because you're with them and you released a book. But how
Yeah.
was that process?
It was good. Anybody who writes something, half the success is a really good editor, but they're not always right. Having a really good editor to clean up your rambling and whatever it may be is important. So if it's a collaboration where the editor or publisher says, this chapter really is bad, it's a real stinker, and you need to do X, Y, and Z, it can really help to have, if you check your ego at the door, to have somebody look at it. On the other hand, it was like my approach to what we did in this, where I did chapters that were basically standalones. I was advised under the heading of, you're launching the Titanic here, to not do that. But I felt it was the right thing to do, and turned out well. So now I can gloat about it. I mean, but what can I tell you? One other thing that you might be interested in, I was telling you about that seminar that I was giving, and one of the things that the scam, or one of the huge scams that are run out there, is companies that you'll send a sample to if they'll take you on, right? And they'll send back something and say, "Oh God, this is so good. Oh, blah blah. We can't wait to do whatever." And so part of the seminar was questions on how do I become if not a best-selling author, at least one that makes some money. And I got to tell you, Scott, if there were tomatoes in the audience, they would have been throwing them at me, because I said, look, the first thing you got to understand is that there's no promotion, there's no fix to bad work. Your work has got to be good. Mm-hmm. It's got to be something people want to read. If you don't have that, it doesn't matter how you promote it. It's like a movie that's being what they call four-walled, advertised everywhere. The first week or two, you get big audience. And then if the movie is a stinker, then it just drops off to nothing. Mm-hmm. It's got to be something that, if your work is going to have legs, got to be something people want to read or listen to, in the case of what you're doing.
What was your writing process for the book? Did you have all the stories down before you got the deal to publish the book, or did you have some of them down? What was that like?
Well, the first book was 8 stories shorter than the one that we're sending out now. So to answer your question, initially I did, I guess, 20 stories, something like that. And we got a positive enough response that they said, "Oh, give us more." So I wrote another 8. And then after that, Scott, I felt I was stretching. I was starting to think, what would make a good story? Well, I'm not that kind of writer. There are writers out there, Stephen King and others, who that's all they do is write stories. That's their thing. And for me, I did some time working at a newspaper. I was a great feature writer, where I think I was great. People might argue, but where you go out and you do a Scott Gardner and you interview people and you do things, or you cover a story of a burning building or whatever. But I've just never been one to sit down and think to myself, man, it'd be a great story to have a car that was alive and evil, and then write that in a way that people really get into it. That's not a skill I have. So, when I did my last Story of the Eight, I realized that I'd kind of shot my bolt. I mean, I'd talked about getting shot down south, and I'd talked about all that, or roping a bear, if you will. But anything more, they were kind of trivial events that I was trying to make into something. And I just stopped and I said, that's it. I've shot my bolt on this particular approach, and you got to know when to, hang up your jock, I guess.
And did you have to go? Now, these stories took place obviously over many, many years, so
Yeah.
it, may not have been possible. But did you ever have to go back when you were putting these stories down and talk to people that were there and say, so, for example, do you happen to remember exactly the name of that bar that we were in when this happened? Did you go back and talk to people from those stories, or were they all just in your head?
I really didn't have to, honestly, Scott. Some things, like one of my things is the day we went shark fishing in our underwear. Some things you just don't forget them. And so I guess I'm egotistical enough to feel that, yeah, I remember that, and just sat down and described it. So to answer your question, no, I really didn't do that. Maybe I should have, but I didn't.
But that could have, who knows how that might have changed the stories. So, maybe let sleeping dogs lie kind of is the better idea in that case.
Yeah. And I tell people that I'm getting to an age where a lot of people who could argue with me are not around anymore. So there you go.
There you go.
Who's going to tell me I'm full of crap? Well,
That's right.
Not too many people anymore.
So you've obviously been around, a lot of different places, just from hearing a few of these snippets of your stories. So what is your view of America itself? You've probably seen a lot of different places, a lot of different people, and we know that America, kind of like Canada, is many different places in one. If you go to the east coast of Canada, to the west coast of Canada, they're completely different places. So
Yeah.
how much did you find out about America through your travels, through your stories?
Well, two things really. One of which I guess is relevant today. By and large, I would have to say that's a good question. By the way, I would have to say that people, mostly everyone, is decent and wants to do the right thing and take care of their family, and are often fairly willing to get involved with some pretty nonsensical things. I did have an experience back in the civil rights days in this country, where three friends of mine and I were driving from the north, where I lived, to the south to go to Mardi Gras. And we were pulled over in Arkansas by the Klan, who shot us up. Figured we were freedom riders. Yeah, shot me and shot my friend. And we reported it to a sheriff, who threw us in jail. And they held us for a week, telling us they were going to kill us and all this stuff. And what I learned from that is that there are places where, and they're mostly isolated, but there are places where people and social sections where people will do not only will do terrible things, but the community will admire them for it. And I think that was probably one of the biggest shocks I ever had. I just thought, they tried to kill us. And then after we got sprung from Durance Vile, we were hungry. We were heading home, and we stopped to get something to eat. And they found out we were the ones that were in jail, and they wouldn't serve us, threw us out. And because the whole community was just, Northern boys thought they'd come down here and tell us what to do. I mean, we were just going to Mardi Gras to get drunk, right? But they're going to come down here and tell us what to do. And we were lucky to get out of there. Mm-hmm. Seriously. And that was probably the biggest shock I had when I was younger. So to answer your question, I do think, in spite of it all, that most people are really basically decent and want to do the right thing. That being said, there are places that have a particular view of things that is destructive, and everyone around them, or at least a lot of people around them, feel the same and will admire them in their community for doing things that people on the outside of the community would view as horrible.
Your story reminds me of a TV show I'm watching right now about Billy the Kid, which is it's a drama, but it's an interesting TV show, and just mindless entertainment to have on in the evening or whatever. And so they're in a town, and of course there's a rich landowner in the town, and he's crooked, and he's got the sheriff in his back pocket. No matter where the heroes turn, they are met with, resistance. And you think, oh, it's a drama, it's a TV show, whatever. But, your story just shows that there are and will be places like that are actually that way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that I remember from that is that, when you're younger and you get shot, what's the first thing you do is you go to the police, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
not that I would know, but I would assume, yeah.
You
knock on wood.
You sheltered person, you.
I know, never been shot before.
Yeah, and we did that, and it was a one little town, and the sheriff showed up and invited us to come inside the jail while he made a call. So we figured he was, I don't know, calling for the cavalry. And he just got on the phone and said, "Hey, yeah, this is Clem. Got some boys here been shot up." And then the rest of his conversation was just, And at the end of it, he slammed the phone down, took out his gun, and pointed at us and said, "In the cells, boys." And so clearly he called somebody who had some knowledge of this and said, "These lads are freedom riders, and they're down here to tell us how to live," and the sheriff was part of that. So yeah,
amazing. Now on the flip side, I'm sure you've met the opposite to that. I'm sure you met some incredibly kind people, and that are just like I think most of us are. I would say probably 98% of us are just living our lives, trying to make a living, trying to be as good as we can. Are there any stories that stick out to you about that kind of interaction that you've had with people?
Well, it's related to this. For the week that we were held in Communicado in this little jail, various people would wander in and entertain us with stories about how they were going to blow our brains out. And one day, a new jailer came on duty, and I said, "Hey, Sheriff." The sheriff, by the way, was the brother of Pretty Boy Floyd, who is a famous American gangster.
Wow.
Yeah. And I said, "Hey, Sheriff Floyd said I could make a call." Now, mind you, we've been there a week, I hadn't had a single call. And the guy didn't know. And he said, "Oh, okay." And so I made a call to, at the time, my parents, and they called the newspaper. And one of the places they called was our college, and I was involved with stuff there. And 20 minutes, Scott, after we made that call, here comes the sheriff with his retinue. He comes down, he looks at us, and he says, you boys have been hurt. Now, mind you, we were shot a week ago, right? And he says, you've been hurt. Let's get some attention for these boys. And what we found out is that it wasn't a half an hour after I got a call out, the governor of Minnesota called that little one-horse jail. I'd given my parents the phone number, and he said, we know you've got people there from our college, going to college here. We know they're there. We know who you are, and nothing had better happen to them. And we were out of there a day later. And what I later found out, what happened is the president of our college, and, I knew him a little bit, but he called his good friend, the governor of Minnesota, and convinced him to call, to use political capital. And mind you, the authorities were saying we'd had a gun battle with police, and they were saying all this stuff, to call this jail. And if they had been wrong, if we had really done something, the political damage could have been enormous. And it really bothered me. And later I asked for an appointment with the president of the college, and I went in to see him, and he said, what can I do for you, young man? And I just said, I got to know why you did it. I mean, you really took a risk. I was just a kid at the time, but I knew enough to know how he'd stuck his neck out. And, Scott, I expected him to say something like, well, I'd met you boys and you're good lads or something, But instead, he went to the window and he started talking about escaping from Germany with his brother, and crawling under the wire to get to France and then getting to England. And the rest of his family was killed, his parents, whatever. And he was crying by the time he was done. And he just said, I vowed to myself then that I would never, never stand by. And I think he saved our life. I am convinced of it to this day. So, yeah, I mean, there are people of courage out there all over the place.
And what year was that that this happened?
Man, long time ago now. 1969, 1970, I guess. I was really young.
That was obviously a tumultuous
oh, yeah. It was
Vietnam going on and the civil rights movement. And
yep.
So, yeah, I can understand why I guess I can understand why the people in the South that are like that were a little bit. They felt, and then now they've got more Northerners, telling them what to do. Let those. So I'm sure they let you go through very gritted teeth.
Well, yeah, that's a good analysis, Scott. What's going on in this country right now is that there's a segment, a minority, granted, but still large, who feel that their way of life is being threatened, that their position in society and the power structure is being threatened. We've seen it in this country numerous times. It happened during the great migrations of the late 1890s. And, you read some of this vitriol that's going on, and you can take articles from newspapers in the 1890s and early 1900s talking about the Polish and the Germans and the Irish and the Chinese, and the language is the same. Mm-hmm. It's the same. So it's been going on for a long time, and it's fear, afraid of people who, aren't us, and they're going to take our jobs, and they're going to this and they're going to that. And if you've got politicians like, what's his name? Oh yeah, Donald Trump, fanning the flames of that fear and hatred, you got trouble.
And the ability for anyone to hop onto their phone or their computer and go to whatever social media platform you want to name and just say whatever the hell they want
Yeah.
and you know the other side says whatever the hell they want, and it's just a recipe for the division that we see now. And the only thing that I kind of am optimistic about is that those kind of people that are, yelling at the top of their lungs online, I don't think represent the vast majority of people.
No. And we need more people out there like you. But in addition, part of it, I guess what I find most distressing is that we need not just our society, everyone, Canadian as well as us, to make sure that people are educated to be skeptical and understand how, when something really inflammatory seems to come along, to check into it and find out if it's really true or it's all crap.
Mm-hmm.
Like right now, for example, I'm in Colorado after my partner and I we had a business, and I moved here from Los Angeles. And here, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, there was a big thing published on social media, which focused on Colorado about how, a small town in Colorado got the word that Antifa was coming and going to take over the town, and all the townspeople got out and stood on the sidewalks with their guns and blah, blah. And it was a complete fabrication. It was a complete bit of creative writing. It never happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I dug into it a little bit and then published the news reports and stuff to the tune of a lot of shrieking. But yeah, you've got to be skeptical of stuff. And when something sounds inflammatory, it's probably either made up or exaggerated.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's definitely spread into, let's call them traditional media outlets as well. The most recent example is the story about the hospital in Gaza being obliterated by Israel when it didn't happen.
Yep.
And I guess the only good thing about it is that because of social media, which is one of the good sides of social media, if that were, let's say, happened in the 60s, it would have been years and years, if ever, until the truth came out.
Yep.
But now with social media, we sort of get the truth we get to the truth a little more quickly than we might possibly have.
And the hope is people will believe it. And the flip side of that is that with social media, the what was Mark Twain's line? A lie goes around the world before truth gets its pants on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. It gets out there. And the thing about the hospital in Gaza, you're right. I mean, they've done a lot of analysis of it, and they even have some video of what happened. But the people who want to believe that the Israelis would do that, it's like dealing in this country with Trumpies, we call them. It doesn't matter. You've got a certain number of people where the truth and evidence really doesn't matter. They won't believe it anyway. And so what I tell my colleagues, when we're doing a little bit of political work, but not much, but I just said, look, it's sad, but there's a certain segment of people who, no matter what evidence is presented, are not going to believe it. So you got to focus on the independents and middle of the road people and people who aren't in a cult, whether it be Hamas or it be Trump or it be QAnon or whatever it is.
And that's one of the things that frustrates me a lot about, and I try to limit my time on Twitter and places like that because it just gets me angry and riled up, and I start wanting to type back, and I decide, no, I'm not going to convince anybody. So it's just causing me, to be angry or whatever. What good is that? And
that's right.
The thing that people don't seem to want to realize that two things can be true at once. That you can think that Hamas is evil and that Hamas should be wiped out, but you can also think at the same time that the mostly innocent people that live there should be kept safe, and they've done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
And I think there, like you said, there's a lot of people that don't want to see that two things can be true at the same time. They want to
Yep.
believe what they want to believe.
Yep. Yeah. It's really true. It's one of the conundrums of human beings, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But and we sure got enough historical evidence what happens when a group of crazies, Germans or whatever, take over a country and a government. And most people, like you made the point, Scott, just want to live their life. They just want to get along. They want to see their kids do well. They want to be safe. And, so that's why playing on fears tends to work, I guess. Sad but true.
Absolutely. So, after your very interesting experience, was it Arkansas? You say you were
Arkansas, yes.
Did you ever go back?
Yeah, well, many years later, went there a couple times on business, but shortly after our episode, no, the South was definitely off my vacation list.
Absolutely, that's not a surprise, I would say.
Yeah.
All right, so now's your chance. Yeah, I know you've been giving very subtle little plugs throughout the throughout the episode. I don't think anyone really noticed other than me, but being facetious, of course.
Plugs should not be subtle.
Yeah. So tell us where we can find you on your website, social media. Where's the best place to get the book? Let us know where to find you.
Well, thank you very much. Website, talesfromtheday.com. What a shock there. And if any of the wonderful, decent people listening to your podcast want to order my book, just go to Amazon and type in Tales from the Day, and my name will help, Wayne McFarland, and it'll pop right up. And it's a bargain.
It is a bargain. Was it $9.95? I saw it.
$9.95. Yep. And so for for a lifetime of foolishness, I guess that's not too much money.
You know what? And the world needs more just entertainment, just to take your mind off the shitty day you had at work or the crap that's going on in the world. We need good stories. We need to laugh, and so I know I'm definitely going to be ordering a copy. So,
thank you. My experience, Scott, is people would much rather laugh than cry.
Absolutely. Now, one last question. Me being in Canada, have you ever made it up to our fine country?
Oh, when I lived in Minnesota, we tried to drink Winnipeg Dry many times. Never succeeded, but not through lack of trying. And I've spent a lot of time in Banff and that area up there, and did a lot of business in Vancouver. Beautiful place you got up there.
It absolutely is.
And doesn't seem to be as wacky as it is down here. So
no, not quite not
yet.
We have our moments, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Wayne, I really appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to reading the book, and I hope we can sell you some copies.
Thank you, that'd be great. Well, thanks, Scott. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much.
It's been great to talk to you.
You too. Take care.
You too.